Hi, my name is Anna Knob, and today we are talking about dead authors, living ideas, and why British literature isn't outdated. You can find me at the Nurtured Bee, and I have been a longtime teacher at True North Academy, and I've been a public school teacher and a private school teacher and teaching at co-op. And my heart and my favorite thing to teach is British literature. And let's be honest, when most people hear Brit Lit, they think old, dusty, and irrelevant. You wonder, why does my teen care about knights, plague stories, or people writing letters about marriage? But what if I told you that British literature is actually one of the most relevant subjects your student can study right now? I've taught it for years and I've seen it transform students' lives. I'm not kidding, mostly because as they read, they realize how relevant old, dusty literature actually is to their lives today. British literature is the backbone of Western storytelling. Hear me out. You can't understand modern stories without it. When you look at stories like Beowulf, which is absolutely one of my most favorites to teach, it really truly comes alive as you start to break it down. The hero's journey is truly rooted in texts like Beowulf and the way that he comes in and you have his backstory and he's the hero. He literally defeats not just Grendel the monster, but Grendel's mother and then the dragon too. We have classic story archetypes like kings, monsters, tricksters, and heroes. The narrative structure that we see in Beowulf is still used in films today. Look at Marvel or Disney movies like Captain America. We get Captain America's backstory. We see how he becomes a hero and he defeats the dragons and monsters, if you will, in his own stories. We're not just reading old stories. We're learning the DNA of every story your child already loves. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you should probably read Beowulf. I love every year we get to the part with the dragon and the treasure hoard, and all of my kids go, The Hobbit, Tolkien. They see it. And then we get to talk about how Tolkien studied Beowulf and translated Beowulf and was a huge Beowulf fan. And you see it reflected in his own work. British literature teaches students to think, not just read. We have critical thinking skills, analyzing complex characters, and understanding theme versus topic, which any of my students could tell you is one of my favorite things to talk about. When we read Pride and Prejudice, we're not looking at just the topic of love. We're talking about and looking at how love builds over time. We're looking at how first impressions can distort truth, or if you jump to conclusions, it can end up hurting you in the long run. It's really neat because it helps us learn and talk about things like discernment, even media literacy, guys, not being easily manipulated by surface level thinking. Wickham feeds Elizabeth Bennet a whole string of stories, right? And so she then has to learn how to discern and decipher through once Darcy comes and gives her that cognitive dissonance of this is my side of the story, right? And so students learn through literature how to even do that for themselves. British literature connects students to history and humanity. I Every year we read Lord of the Flies. And if you haven't read it in a while, it is about children stranded on an island. And in the midst of the story, the children devolve. And it is hard to read as you read it as children. However, what is so important and the thing that we focus on in my class is that William Golding, the author, had been in World War II, and not just been in World War II, but he was actually in some significant battles and moments. And so he wrote Lord of the Flies as a reflection of evil unchecked, of what happens without structure and how he saw men devolve in war. And so when they go into it with that lens, the entire story changes for them because it gives them another connection point and not just understanding of humanity and the rawness and the depths that human nature can go, but it also gives them another connection point to that history and reading it with that understanding of his experience in World War II. When we read Beowulf, as I keep talking about, we are reading about honor and legacy and courage and the way that Wiglaf and Beowulf tell the men to stand up and fight for their honor, right? In Canterbury Tales, it is messy. Again, I love teaching Canterbury because Chaucer gives us an incredible breadth of humanity. We have everybody from the nun, and we have the knight in his goodness and chivalry. We have the miller, who is that person, right? There's always like one in the group, or when you go somebody, it's the miller, right? You have the wife of Bath, who is going against societal expectations, but still holds her head up high, even though we question and we judge her, right? And so we're able to see that really humanity hasn't changed. Humanity in the Middle Ages, in the 1300s, people are still people. And there's humor and there's social commentary. Canterbury Tales is not far off of a medieval Office episode, guys, if you really think about it. And then we have Shakespeare, who we see created the invention of the human in literature and in plays. Prior to Shakespeare, we don't get inner monologue or inner motivation the same way that we do after him. Chaucer gets close to it, but we still have that narrator. We get even closer to it in with David and the Psalms in the Bible, but Shakespeare gives us that to be or to not to be. He gives us Shylock, hath a Jew not eyes? Shakespeare gives us that power and ambition and identity, the love, the hate, the passion. These aren't outdated problems. These are human problems and the human condition. Teens today are asking, who am I? What is truth? What is good leadership? Brit Lit gives us language and stories to explore those things. British literature builds cultural literacy without being snobby about it, though I will admit I'm a bit of a classicist snob. It gives us ways to understand references in books and films and conversations. How many times have you seen a movie and gone, I've read this before? That's because you probably have. Most early 2000s and late 90s rom-coms are actually retellings of Shakespeare. The Lion King is Hamlet. That's one of the most popular ones. We recognize allusions. Allusions are references to other pieces of literature. Often we see this biblically. Shakespeare had biblical allusions and references all the time. The same thing happens if you call somebody a Darcy or an Emma, right? We recognize these classic characters, a Gatsby, right? We recognize these classic character names, who they are as characters, and we can apply them to other, maybe more modern characters. We have the star-crossed lovers, a monster like Frankenstein. Big Brother is watching. Yes, in case you forgot, 1984 and Brave New World were both written by British authors. It's not about being elitist. It's about being literate in the world your child is living in. British literature helps shape character. And this is really the heart of all of this. Stories help us wrestle with pride, sacrifice, justice, redemption. We see Darcy, the pride, have to humble himself and admit his own faults and his own poor judgments. Macbeth, we see his unchecked ambition and how that falls in the end. And we have Golding, who we already talked about, who shows us human nature without moral grounding. Stories don't just inform our minds, they form our hearts. British literature, especially for me, is not about memorizing old texts. It's about thinking deeply, understanding people, their motivations, why they respond, how they respond, and recognizing the truth in all of it. If you've ever wondered whether a subject is worth your students' time, it absolutely is. And if you're not sure where to start, I can help you with that too. The goal is not just to raise students who can read books. It's to raise students who can read the world.